that Caitlyn not be able to play today?
Um, about 5 o'clock.
Did she say that there was pain? How did that all kind of come to pass?
Just woke up with some stiffness and some soreness, and we like to see again, like I always say, like how do you respond after a workout? Is it for us? It's not the time.
There is a specific kind of silence that follows an athlete back from injury. Not the silence of absence that one is loud, filled with speculation and replacement narratives, and people quietly adjusting their expectations downward. This is a different silence. It arrives the moment she steps back onto the floor, and everyone in the building realizes, almost simultaneously, that nothing actually changed while she was gone. Caitlyn Clark walked back into a WNBA season carrying that silence with her. And within the first few games, she had already reset what the league considered possible from a single player. The offense did not rebuild around her return. It simply resumed, as if the interruption had been a technical delay rather than a season-altering injury. What made that return remarkable was not the statistics alone. Though Indiana's offense scoring at 91.8 points per game through the first 8 games best in the entire league tells its own story, what made it remarkable was the weight she carried back in with her. Every franchise decision made in her absence, every front office conversation she was not part of, every quiet shift in organizational philosophy that happened while she was rehabilitating, all of it was waiting for her on the other side. She came back playing the best basketball of her career, and somewhere above her, a different kind of game had already begun. If this kind of storytelling feels different from what you usually find that is intentional, subscribe, and we will keep building it together. Caitlyn Clark did not arrive in professional basketball as a project. She arrived as something rarer, a player who had already figured out who she was before the league had a chance to tell her otherwise. The kind of competitor that emerges from years of being the most serious person in every gym she walked into, long before anyone was paying attention. That internal standard, built quietly over years of repetition and self-imposed pressure, is what separates athletes who perform under expectation from those who perform beyond it. Clark belonged to the second category before she ever signed a professional contract, and every team that evaluated her knew it. Indiana knew it, most of all when they made her the first overall pick. What that origin story produces is not just skill, it produces an operating system that runs independent of external validation. Clark does not need the front office to believe in her in order to function at an elite level. She proved that the moment she returned from injury and immediately looked like the best player in the league. The standards she holds herself to are older and stricter than any organizational philosophy could replicate. That self-sufficiency is an asset in a player. But inside certain organizational cultures, it can also read as something more threatening, an independence that resists being managed, shaped, or quietly redirected towards someone else's vision of what the franchise should be. Every franchise has a philosophy that exists before its best player arrives. Sometimes that philosophy bends to accommodate greatness. Sometimes it holds its shape and waits for the player to conform to it. The Indiana Fever had people inside their organization who had built something before Caitlyn Clark. A culture, a set of values, a way of doing things that predated her arrival and, in certain corners of that building, clearly feels like it should outlast her too. Lynn Dunn is not a peripheral figure in that organization. She is a former GM and head coach who delivered Indiana their only WNBA championship. Her fingerprints on the franchise's identity run deeper than any single roster decision. And when she speaks publicly about culture and fit, and the difficult necessity of removing players who disrupt what you have built, that carries institutional weight that a retweet alone cannot convey. What makes the current situation structurally complicated is that Dunn's public commentary did not emerge in isolation. It arrived alongside a pattern panel appearances, social media activity, professional relationships, all quietly orbiting the same destination, the LA Sparks, the coaching search there. The broader whisper network that connects front offices, media personalities, and the kind of background conversations that never get confirmed but always seem to move in one direction. Systems inside organizations do not announce themselves. They operate through repetition, through the slow accumulation of a single narrative told in enough rooms by enough trusted voices until it becomes the version of events that reaches the people with the authority to act on it. There is a version of Caitlyn Clark that exists purely in statistics. and that version is already extraordinary. But the more interesting version lives in the space between the numbers in the decisions she makes before the ball arrives, in the way she reads a defense 2 possessions before it becomes relevant, in the gravity she generates simply by being on the floor. Indiana's offense does not lead the league because Clark scores every point. It leads the league because every defensive scheme built to stop her creates openings for everyone around her. Aaliyah Boston operates in space that Clark's presence manufactures. Kelsey Mitchell runs off screens into gaps that exist only because 2 defenders have already committed to Clark's side of the floor. That kind of offensive architecture is rare, and it is not accidental. What Clark brought to Indiana was not just production, it was a complete restructuring of how the team could be built around a single decision-maker. Opponents cannot ignore her from distance, cannot crowd the paint without surrendering threes, cannot send help without leaving Boston or Mitchell in daylight. That tactical reality is what pushed Indiana's offense to the top of the league, even as the defense struggled behind it. And here is where the basketball truth becomes organizationally inconvenient. The same roster running the worst defensive numbers is simultaneously running the best offensive numbers. That is not a roster problem. That is a schematic one. The talent is clearly sufficient. The question is what is being done with it, and by whom. Sophie Cunningham did not go public by accident. Athletes at her level understand exactly what it means to put something on the record, and what she chose to say was precise in a way that casual frustration rarely produces. Indiana, through the first 8 games of the season, was running a single defensive scheme. Not because the playbook was thin, Cunningham confirmed the Fever carried roughly 10 defensive looks from the previous season, but because, for reasons that were never fully explained publicly, only one of those looks was being deployed game after game. Every opponent knew it was coming. Every coaching staff had film on it, and Indiana kept running it anyway, getting carved up in the same spots, surrendering the same angles, losing the same battles in ways that had nothing to do with effort or talent, and everything to do with what the coaching staff was or was not willing to execute. What Cunningham's words exposed was a fracture that statistics alone could not locate. The defense was not failing because the players lacked capability. It was failing because the system surrounding those players had been narrowed to a single option in a league that punishes predictability without mercy. And when a team's defense collapses without explanation, the blame does not distribute itself evenly. It finds the most visible target. Clark draws more defensive attention than anyone on this roster. She gets scrutinized on every possession, in every quarter, by analysts and executives and the kind of media personalities with confirmed access to front office insiders. Cunningham pulled the explanation into the open before that blame could quietly settle somewhere it did not belong. What does it tell us about an organization when a role player has to be the one to publicly defend its best player, and what should fans make of the silence from those above her? The public version of Caitlyn Clark exists in highlight reels and attendance figures, and the kind of cultural conversation that follows very few athletes in any sport. But the private version, the one that actually explains everything the public version produces, lives in a completely different kind of time. The hours before shoot-around, the film sessions that run longer than scheduled because something in the previous game's defensive coverage did not sit right. The repetition of a single movement until it stops being a decision and becomes instinct. That version of Clark is not documented the way her performances are, but it is the version that made the return from injury look effortless to anyone watching from the outside. Effortless things are never effortless. They are the result of a preparation discipline that most people never see, and fewer still could sustain. What that invisible work produces, beyond the statistics, is a standard that permeates everything around it. Teammates feel it. Coaching staffs feel it. The tone of a practice changes when the person with the highest expectations in the building also holds the highest expectations for herself. Clark did not arrive in Indiana, asking the organization to build around her talent alone. She arrived with a work ethic that implicitly raises the bar for every person sharing that floor with her. That kind of presence is either embraced as the foundation of something lasting or quietly resented by the people whose own standards it makes visible by comparison. Inside certain organizations, excellence is welcome when it is manageable, when it operates independently of the system around it. That is, when the conversations about culture and fit tend to begin. Aaliyah Boston signed a $6 million contract in the shadow of Clark's arrival, And that number does not exist in a vacuum. It exists because of what Clark's presence on the floor does to defensive positioning, to help rotations, to the impossible choices opposing coaches have to make every single possession. Boston's game, her angles to the basket, her catch and finish opportunities, her ability to operate in the mid-post without a second defender collapsing is fundamentally shaped by where Clark forces defenses to commit their attention. That is not a coincidence of roster construction. That is a basketball relationship built on a specific kind of trust. The kind where one player's willingness to draw pressure becomes another player's professional foundation. Remove Clark from that equation and Boston's contract looks different. Her production looks different. Her entire operating environment changes. Kelsey Mitchell represents a parallel truth. The screen she runs off, the space she finds in transition, the catch-and-shoot opportunities that have defined her offensive role, all of it flows from the defensive gravity Clark generates on the other side of the floor. These are not peripheral relationships. They are structural ones, woven into the way Indiana functions as a basketball team at the most fundamental level. And what makes the current front office conversation so difficult to reconcile with basketball reality is that a trade does not simply move one player. It dismantles an entire ecosystem that took years to construct. The teammates Clark elevated did not get there alone, and they would not remain there without her. Watch Indiana's offense for 3 consecutive possessions, and the architecture becomes visible in a way that broadcast commentary rarely captures. Clark receives the ball above the arc, and the defense makes an immediate calculation: close out hard and surrender the drive, or sit back and concede the 3. There is no comfortable middle ground, because Clark is a legitimate threat from both positions simultaneously. That dual threat is what creates the half-second of hesitation that Boston exploits on the weak side. It is what gives Mitchell the extra step she needs coming off the screen. The defense is not reacting to 5 players. It is reacting to 1 player and trying to manage the consequences of that reaction across the remaining 4. That is an extraordinarily difficult problem to solve, and Indiana's opponents have not solved it. They have simply learned to live with the damage it produces. Through 8 games, 91.8 points per game, best in the league. That number carries more information than its surface suggests. It means that even when opposing coaches spend an entire week designing a defensive scheme specifically around eliminating Clark's most dangerous looks, the offense still functions at an elite level. It means the system has enough internal flexibility, enough trust between players, enough collective basketball intelligence to find the answer even when the primary option is taken away. That kind of offensive resilience does not emerge from a roster that lacks cohesion or a star who cannot elevate those around her. It emerges from something that took real time to build and real time to lose. If the people making decisions above it choose to look away from what the numbers are plainly saying. Before Caitlyn Clark walked through Indiana's door, the Fever were drawing 4,500 fans to a half-empty arena. That number is not a footnote. It is the entire context for everything that followed. 17,000 seats filled, national television windows that did not exist before. Merchandise moving out of a team store that most casual fans could not have located on a map 2 years earlier. A franchise that existed at the edges of the league's broader conversation, suddenly sitting at the center of it. None of that appears in a box score. None of it shows up in the advanced metrics that front offices use to evaluate roster decisions. But all of it is real, and all of it traces back to one player's ability to make people care about something they had quietly stopped caring about. That is a form of leadership that statistics were never designed to measure. What Clark produced in Indiana goes beyond the basketball. She gave a fan base a reason to show up, and then gave them a reason to keep showing up, and then gave them a reason to believe that showing up might eventually lead somewhere worth arriving at. That relationship between a player and a city is fragile in ways that front offices sometimes fail to appreciate until it is already gone. It is built on trust and consistency, and the shared belief that the people making decisions understand the value of what they have been given. Attendance does not recover quickly when that trust breaks. It does not return on the strength of a trade package, or a culture reset, or a garden analogy delivered on a public panel. It returns, if it returns at all, one rebuilt season at a time. There are moments in a franchise's history that only reveal their full weight in retrospect. The trade that looked reasonable at the time and spent the next decade looking catastrophic. The culture reset that cleared out the wrong people and left the right problems completely intact. The organizational philosophy that made perfect sense inside a conference room and zero sense the moment it met the reality of what was actually being built on the floor. Indiana is standing at one of those moments right now. And the people inside that building who understand basketball know it. The numbers are not ambiguous. The attendance is not ambiguous. The offensive production is not ambiguous. What remains genuinely unclear is whether the voices with the clearest view of that reality are the ones closest to the decision that matters most. What happens next in Indiana will not just determine the trajectory of one franchise. It will say something lasting about how women's basketball treats the rarest thing it can produce, a player who moves the entire sport forward simply by showing up and competing at the highest level she knows. Clark did not ask Indiana to build a monument. She asked for a real chance to win, and then went out and constructed the most compelling argument for that chance that any player in this league has produced in years. The decision sitting above all of that now belongs to people who will have to live with it long after the panel appearances and the social media trails and the garden analogies have faded from memory. Some decisions in sports are just basketball. This one is bigger than that. If this story stayed with you alike, lets us know it was worth the care we put into building it. We are already working on the next one, and it goes deeper than anything we have covered so far. Stay close.